Thank you. Thank you for joining us for Couch and Court Issues. My name is Carla, and I'm a therapist. And here's Mark, my husband and family law attorney.
I am glad to be here. This show is our way of serving others with our time and talent as a therapist and attorney.
We're both excited about being here. We talk about real-life problems that impact the family. Today, we're going to discuss child abuse. This topic was selected in response to listening to adults' concerns regarding how society views discipline and the fear that some parents have of being accused of child abuse. Mark, with that being said, could you please provide a working definition of child abuse?
Child abuse is any intentional harm or mistreatment to a child under 18 years of age. There are 4 forms of child abuse: physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect. Today we're going to talk about physical abuse. In no way are we diminishing the impact of neglect, sexual, and emotional abuse. However, due to time constraints, we're unable to cover all 4 types. That being said, a child who is a victim of physical abuse or neglect is susceptible to other forms of abuse. Physical abuse happens when, first, a parent or any person who has legal custody over a child deliberately inflicts injury to a child in any way. Second, creates a situation where there is a risk of serious physical injury, or knowingly allows someone else to harm your child or otherwise fails to protect your child from harm.
Mark, I'm listening to your definition. I was listening really clearly, and you said something I have a question about. You stated physical abuse occurs when a parent or any person who has legal custody over a child deliberately inflicts injury. My question to you is, what's the difference between someone other than a parent or caregiver abusing a child?
Carla, that's a good question. Child Protective Services was created only to protect children from their parents or primary caregivers. However, law enforcement is the agency established to protect all people, including children who have been victimized. Carla, what is punishment and how does that differ from child abuse?
Great question. It's important to discuss the difference between punishment and discipline. Child abuse happens, or it can happen, in an honest attempt to punish a child. It can be a factor that leads to going over the line into child abuse. The difference between punishment, which can lead to child abuse, and discipline, which is a vital part of raising children to become healthy, productive adults, are based on some outcomes as a result of discipline and punishment. I'm going to talk about 4 types of outcomes, and I'm going to compare them to punishment and discipline. For example, punishment, the purpose of that is to inflict penalty for an offense. And the purpose for discipline is to train for correction and maturity. The focus for punishment is for past misdeeds, whereas the focus for discipline is for future corrective acts. When we talk about attitude, the attitude for punishment is hostility and frustration on the part of the parent. And the attitude for discipline is on love and concern on the part of the parent. And most importantly, we're talking about outcome, and I want to talk about the emotional outcome. The emotional outcome of punishment is fear and guilt, meaning that a child will do what you ask them to do and will respond, but it's based on feeling guilty or fearful. Whereas discipline is based on security, a child feeling secure in their world and then therefore doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, both morally and ethically.
Carla, thanks for the clear distinction between punishment and discipline. Could you provide more details about punishment versus discipline, as some listeners may believe they are one and the same?
It's common for people to believe discipline and punishment is one and the same. Some people want to put it on a continuum. I taught years ago classes with CPS, Child Protective Services, parenting classes, and some of the parents did feel like if I don't punish my child, there's not consequences. But there's consequences in everything we do. It's just the type of consequences we're looking for. That being said, punishment focuses on the past, which leads children to feel helpless. They cannot do what they have already done. Punishment does not give them a means to right their wrongs. Punishment is retribution that leads to a lot of negative emotions. Punishment is out of parents' anger, frustration, and need for a parent to feel that a child must pay for their behavior. Discipline is on the other end of the spectrum. Discipline is the whole purpose of that is future focus. It's about redemption. The purpose of discipline is to focus on the future acts. Discipline always holds the child's best interest in the forefront. It is never out of control. So when someone says, I went too far or I lost control, that's never discipline. That is punishment. We're all human, and we get angry and frustrated with our kids at times. But I am so thankful for grace. We love the gospel of grace when it comes to God with our sins, as much as we love grace and mercy when it applies to us. We have a hard time, really hard time, some of us, applying to others, especially when it's someone who can wound our hearts as deeply as our children can. The closer the relationship, the more betrayed and frustrated we feel. And those kinds of feelings can lead to ill-conceived punishment and even child abuse.
Carla, I like those comments. Let me ask you this question. What are some of your thoughts about spanking, which is a very controversial issue?
You said it, Mark. It's very controversial. However, regardless of how we feel, spanking and physical abuse are two different distinct things, or should be considered two different distinct things. If you're not seeing it as distinct different, there lies the issue. If a parent decides to spank as a method to teach a young child, it should be done in a way it modifies attitudes and behaviors, and it actually strengthens the bond between the parent and the child. As children get older and begin to think abstractly, spanking becomes less effective and less necessary. I really read a lot on Focus on the Family, and they have a great article in their website, and it's called The Biblical Approach to Spanking, 7 Steps to Discipline Your Child by Chip Ingram, encouraging anyone who disciplines with spanking as a final option to read this article. We may not always agree on the various methods of child rearing. In the end, it's up to each couple to decide. As a therapist, I believe some issues come down to how it should be done as opposed to if it should or should not be done.
Carla, I agree with your comments on implementing discipline. It's also a good idea for adults to do a self-check or self-assessment before responding. In the self-help community, they have a slogan called HALT, or hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. If your response is based upon you being hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, halt your corrective measures. They can wait. Take care of yourself first before you attempt to take care of the situation.
HALT is just a great thing to live by, and the self-help communities are really great with that. HALT is good not only for disciplining your kids. HALT is a great thing to look at when it comes to your spouse before you respond or act, to just do a self-assessment. It's also a good idea at work. Maybe it's something you want to tell your boss, but maybe it's because you're so busy that you didn't have a chance to eat lunch and you're just hungry. And it might be a better idea to eat a sandwich before you speak. Mark, I love the secular community, and I love self-help meetings, AANA, Celebrate Recovery, Food Addicts Anonymous. They have a lot of great slogans. Mark, with all that being said, what would you do if you suspect a child is being abused?
Carla, you should report it immediately by calling Child Protective Services. The sooner you get help and support for the child, the better the child's chance of recovery. If the child needs immediate medical attention, call 911. Keep in mind that all healthcare professionals are legally required to report all suspected cases of child abuse.
Mark, what are the consequences of child abuse?
Some children overcome the physical and psychological effects of child abuse, particularly those with strong social support who can adapt and cope with bad experiences. For many others, however, child abuse has lifelong consequences. For example, child abuse may result in low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and suicide attempt. Carla, is treatment possible for the child who has been abused?
Definitely, Mark. Therapy can help a child who has been abused learn to trust again, as well as teach the child about normal behavior in relationships. Therapy can also teach children conflict management and boost self-esteem. But more is needed. Be a supportive person, a listening ear, or just be there to offer encouragement and support, letting the child know he or she is special and highly valued. Mark, how can we offer support for the child who is being abused?
Carla, if a child tells you or she is being abused, take the situation seriously. The child's safety is most important. Here's what you can do. First, encourage the child to tell you what happened. Remain calm as you assure the child it's okay to talk about the experience, even if someone has threatened him or her to keep silent. Second, remind the child that he or she isn't responsible for the abuse. The responsibility for the child belongs to the abuser. Third, contact Child Protective Services. Authorities will investigate the report and, if necessary, take steps to ensure the child's safety. And finally, if the abuse has happened at school, make sure the principal of the school is aware of the situation. Carla, what prevention steps would you recommend?
We can take simple steps to prevent your child from child abuse and neglect, as well as prevent child abuse in your neighborhood or community. We can offer your child love and attention. Nurturing your child, listening and being involved in her life can develop trust and good communication. Most importantly, don't respond in anger. If you feel overwhelmed or out of control, take a break. Take a time out. Don't take out your anger on your child. Remember things like HALT, with Mark shared earlier. Hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. That's a way to do a self-assessment. Anger management classes are great classes to take. One of the things they talk about is pause. After your first thought. We can't control our first thought. It may just pop in our head, but we can control what we do with that first thought if we react right away. We don't have to. We can take a moment. We can pray. We can take a deep breath. We can think before we react. Sometimes it's a good idea to fast forward. If I do this, this is what happened last time, and fast it forward and say, well, this is what will happen again. How has that worked for me in the past? Or, to rewind. I did this before, and this is how it looked. And if I do it again, this is how it will look. And how did that work for me? Know your child's caregivers. Check references for babysitters and other caregivers. Irregular but frequent unannounced visits to observe what's happening. I often see in the news caregivers being arrested after they were secretly recorded abusing the child. Emphasize the importance of saying no to your child. Make sure your child understands that he or she doesn't have to do anything that seems scary or uncomfortable. And there's never a good reason to keep a secret. There's never a good reason to not tell mom or dad. Teach your child how to stay safe on the computer. We can't emphasize that enough. We've had 2 other segments, our first one and our second one on bullying, and we talk about cyberbullying. Use parental controls to restrict the type of website your child can visit and check your child's privacy setting on social networks. Consider it a red flag if your child is secretive about online activities. You may want to move your computer to a common area of your home. Mark, with that being said, what is the role of CPS when suspected child abuse is reported?
If you are suspected of child abuse, an emergency response social worker from Child Protective Services will contact you to investigate whether a child is being abused or neglected. The emergency social worker will assess the family problem and needs and provide support services to help keep children in their own homes whenever possible. Carla, and we're also talking about what happens if CPS takes the child. If your child is removed from the home, from the juvenile court will determine if the child can be placed with a family member or relative, and that's important. If not, the child will be placed with a foster care parent. The goal of the juvenile court is to preserve families by identifying the problems that have caused the removal of the child and offer the parents the education, counseling, and other services necessary to get the child back in the home. A social worker will be assigned to your case to provide her assessment and recommendations to the court about when it would be safe for your child to return home. A case plan will be developed by the social worker to identify what you need to do to have your child return to your home. If your child is removed from your home, you have a legal right to visit your child, unless a court order states that you may not visit.
Being a mom and just working with parents and loving moms feels very overwhelming to hear that. But I love the thing you said about juvenile court and the purpose of that. And I just want to remind you, whatever happens in our lives, remember, every life challenge is an opportunity to grow. If for any reason your family is involved with CPS, utilize this as a growth moment, as difficult as that may sound. False reports are common. Sometimes during custody and divorce cases, false reports may be filed. Sometimes kids make a false report to avoid discipline or even punishment. Other times, accidents happen, no fault to the parents. And then there are those times where parents have gone too far and CPS should be called. The first thing I want you to know is just because CPS is called or report is made does not require a social worker to physically investigate. There's a criteria for that. The second point I want you to know is that the purpose of a CPS worker is not to accuse, but to investigate, to gather information and to determine the risk or possible risk of danger for the child in your home. I want to encourage you to use this experience as a positive one. no matter how painful it may be. It may be an opportunity for your family to get much needed help. It may be an opportunity to no longer ignore other things that's going in the home. And there are sometimes we need to get help and we don't. But sometimes when it comes to our kids, we're willing to do things that we need to do for ourselves that we were not able to do before. So use this as a learning and growth opportunity. It can be an opportunity to come together with other churches and stuff and family members to get more support. With all that being said, Mark, what's the best way to get a child returned as soon as possible?
The fastest way to have your child return is by completing the required services, such as a parenting class, an anger management class, counseling, drug testing, and most importantly, acknowledging responsibility of the problems that caused the removal of the child.
The majority of parents who abuse their children love their children, but many factors can lead them to doing things they regret, such as trouble managing stress, lack of parenting skills, a history of abuse or problems with alcohol and drugs or other addictions. I just want to thank you again for joining us for Couch and Court Issues with family law attorney Mark Ambrose and myself, Carla, his wife and therapist. Hope you join us again next week.
The information provided by Carla and Mark is not intended to establish a therapist-client or attorney-client relationship. If you have any questions regarding you or your family's legal interests, please call attorney Mark Ambrose at 916-492-9170. This program is sponsored by the law offices of Mark Ambrose.